Aloha everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sincerely Alana. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about parenting and parenting styles, as well as Hanai, which is a common parenting situation in Hawaii. The reason that I wanted to talk to you guys about parenting styles is because I feel that it is so important to be involved in your children's life. The theme with this whole season has been COVID, Black Lives Matter, and these really deep and kind of scary topics that we are currently living through. So being a parent, having kids, I think it's so important to make sure that you're teaching them and connecting with them on a level that helps prepare them. So without further ado, we're going to be jumping into the 4 different styles of parenting. So the first style of parenting that we're going to talk about today is the authoritarian parent. So authoritarian parents basically believe that their kids should follow the rules without any exception. One of the most famous sayings that these parents say is "because I said so," and I know for sure that applied to one of my parents. I love you, Mom. They also don't allow their kids to get involved with like problem solving or really dealing with challenges. Instead, they make the rules for them and just enforce them through consequences with very little regard for the child's opinions or feelings about it. Authoritarian parents might use punishments instead of discipline. So rather than teach the child how to make better choices, they're more invested in making the kid feel like sorry for their mistakes. So just like teaching that what I've said and if you break this rule is wrong, it's wrong, instead of trying to get them to think for themselves and like figure it out. It's just, you're wrong, I'm right, and now you're in trouble. Children who grow up with really strict authoritarian parents tend to follow rules much of the time, but their obedience comes with a cost. These kids are at risk of developing self-esteem problems, and that's because they feel that their opinion is not valued. They also might become hostile or aggressive, and also continue to pick up and also perpetuate later in life with their own kids how to punish rather than just discipline. These kids also may grow up to be really good liars because they would have to lie in order to avoid being punished. So yeah, that's authoritarian parenting, very basics, very strict, not a lot of room for movement, and more about punishment than discipline, so to speak. The next style is authoritative parenting. Authoritative has rules, and they use consequences, but they also take their children's opinions into consideration. They validate their child's feelings while also making it very clear that ultimately the parent is in charge. Authoritative parents often spend a lot of time talking to their kids and trying to prevent behavioral problems before they start. But to do this also, they use positive reinforcement. So just rewarding their kids for good behavior and praising them, and just, I think the big thing for me when it comes to authoritative parenting is taking the time to communicate with your kids, expectations, their feelings, why they feel that way, and just letting them know that they're doing a good job. Just having that really strong, open line of communication, I think, makes such a difference. The effect that this has on kids, a lot of researchers have found that these kids often grow up to become really responsible adults who feel comfortable expressing their own opinions and taking accountability for themselves. These kids also tend to be overall just happier and more successful, and they're good at making good decisions and just evaluating their own risks and safety when it comes to being on their own. The third style of parenting is called permissive parenting, and these parents are often latent and will only step in if there's a serious problem that their child's involved in. These parents are very forgiving, very laid back, and will usually say like, oh, kids will be kids. They have consequences, but they don't necessarily like enforce those consequences, if that makes sense. So they'll say that the child's grounded for 2 weeks, but will only ground them for like 2 days, something like that. Permissive parents often won't enforce that consequence. They might give special privileges, especially if the child does start behaving better or if the child begs them to. Permissive parents are often those who try to play the friend role more than the parent role, and the way that this can affect the child is if the parent doesn't really discourage poor choices or bad behavior, and so the child will often perform poorly academically. They also might continue to exhibit behavioral problems, especially a lack of respect to authority figures. And a lot of research has also found that these kids report to have low self-esteem or may report having a lot of sadness. Another effect that it can have on kids is poor health problems. Some examples of these include obesity, as well as having more dental cavities, because oftentimes the parents won't enforce good habits. Finally, the fourth style of parenting is called uninvolved parenting, and it's basically when the parent has little to no knowledge of what their children are doing. There tend to be few roles, and the kids are not receiving much guidance, nurturing, or parental attention. Uninvolved parents are often seen as neglectful and might expect their children to raise themselves or just learn things on their own. But that parent might also have mental issues and not know how to raise a child. They might not be able to know how to care for a child's physical or mental well-being. Uninvolved parents can also be very overwhelmed with other issues going on in their life, whether it's jobs, paying bills. They also might not have had involved parenting as a child themselves, so they might just lack the knowledge of how to help children and about child development. And so kids will often struggle with severe self-esteem issues. They tend to perform really poorly in school, and they also exhibit really poor behavioral issues and not experience very much happiness. So yeah, those are the 4 types of parenting. I think just in those descriptions alone, I got all that information online through my classes, and it's kind of always stayed the same as I've learned about this throughout the years. Out of those 4, obviously the authoritative parenting seems like the best style of parenting, but don't think that parents are just solely one out of the 4 or one out of the other. Oftentimes these stages can happen in stages. At one point you might be authoritarian, you might be authoritative, you might become uninvolved when there's a stressful situation in your life. So it's not rigid, it's not one or the other. You can also be a combination of both. It just really depends on your involvement in your child's life. The next episode that I'm going to be posting for Sincerely Alana is my tips on how to have difficult conversations with kids and just parenting styles in general. No one's a perfect parent. Nobody is a perfect child either. So I think the big thing is just practicing patience, practicing mindfulness, being aware of how you're feeling and how you are communicating that or taking that out on your child. So since this is a parenting episode, and since it has been a while since I focused on something very specific to Pacific Islanders, I wanted to take the time today to talk about something that is close in my family, and that is the Hawaiian term Hanai. I really hope I'm saying that right. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right, but Hanai, H-A-N-A-I. Hanai is loosely translated to adoption, but its meaning is much different than what the Western understanding of adoption is. Hanai children are known within their biological families and usually keep close ties to everybody in their biological family. In most cases, the babies are placed in homes with their close relatives. So pre-colonial Hawaii, this was really common, and it was where the firstborn of a family would be given to their grandparents. So say if it's a firstborn boy, they would be going to their paternal grandparents, and if it's a firstborn girl, then the girl would be going to her maternal grandparents. This was actually a really practical arrangement, and like I said, they were still keeping in contact with their biological families, their biological parents, and they were staying within their bloodline. But it was really practical in the sense that it was a great way to pass down knowledge and culture to future generations. Well, now, today, Hanai for Hawaiians is kind of seen as giving your child away. And so there's been a really big disconnect. The reason why this is so close to my heart and my family is because, in a sense, my mom is Hanai and I'm also kind of Hanai. But we were not told any of this. We were not told or explained what Hanai was. For my mom, she was not even told about her family situation and how her mom, who she grew up with, was not her mom. It's a lot of information. I'm not going to go into details, but this is how historical trauma and how lack of intergenerational communication has completely disrupted and impacted my life. For Hanai's pre-contact Hawaii, the way that it's traditionally done, it actually brings the family closer together, and like I said, it's a great way, it's a practical way to pass down knowledge and culture. Post-colonial, how it's affected my family, it's actually divided my family, it's torn my family apart, it's impacted my mom and I mentally, and it's had serious consequences on our lives, because not having that knowledge, not knowing what it means traditionally or how it can benefit us and our cultural knowledge, yeah, it was never explained to us. And so to feel like we were given up, to feel like we are not valued to our parents, to feel like something was wrong with us, when traditionally that was never the case. Yeah, it's been damaging, but this is why, this is really part of the reason why I've been making these videos, is to learn more and to share with others who might not know these things, because historical trauma is very real, especially for Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, everybody who has been affected by colonialism, whose culture, whose country, whose land has been taken because of Western expansion. We all deal with these side effects of historical trauma and loss that it's really important to talk about in order to prevent us from hurting any further, in order to limit the mental damage that it does long-term and generationally. So just to go back to Hanai and how it was used in pre-colonial, pre-contact Hawaii, it was really common. Hanai was considered sharing, it was considered binding, it brought families closer together, and Hanai children were just as loved and just as cherished as if they were their biological kids. Historically, Hanai was also used for political purposes, especially when thinking about how it brought the royal families together. Hanai was basically like an alliance that was adopted and created to form stronger bonds and links of friendships between the chiefs. And I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure Hanai actually started as a royal thing to do and spread to the common people who wanted to foster a sense of community and a stronger sense of harmony. Also, Hanai was also a stronger forge or alliance than marriages. So although, you know, with marriage, people are of course irritated with their parents-in-laws, but people are less likely to wage war on their parents, either biological or adopted. And Hanai is just one of the family dynamics that are unique to Pacific Islander culture, specifically Native Hawaiians. If you know more, please be sure to comment below. I would love to do more research and get more familiar. I hope you guys enjoyed today's videos. The reason why I wanted to talk about parenting this season is just to try to help you guys be aware of where you are mentally as a parent, or maybe how your parents talk to you and where they could be mentally within their own parenting. I hope that with this information, it makes it easier to kind of be mindful of where you are at and how to have conversations with your parents or with your children. Like I said, season 3 is talking about some of the most difficult conversations that we have had up to this point, and it's difficult. It's difficult to talk about these things, and it's one thing to hear me talk about them, to do your own research, but where it really drives it home and where you start to really develop your own points and your mindset and understanding is through conversations. So what better a place to start than talking about parenting and, you know, addressing your parenting style. I also hope you guys enjoyed this little segment about Hanai and this little tidbit of Native Hawaiian culture. I hope you guys found it interesting. If this is something that maybe you have had happen to you in your life or is close to your family and you just didn't know it, send me a message. I'd love to talk about it. There's still so much more that I want to know and learn about. So be sure to comment. I hope you guys like this video. Be sure to tune in next week where I give you guys tips on how to have difficult conversations with kids. And most importantly, be sure to spread peace, love, and positivity. Mahalo.